Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Uh, I received a request this week from Sister Nabila for this particular PDF, and I'm quite sure I shared it last week in the class. So I just remembered now that Sister Nabila wanted this PDF. So I'm just going to very quickly share it with her, and then we will start with our lesson, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we begin, does everybody have this PDF? Like I said, this is a PDF that's written by an alim from Durban who is currently alive. And if you can recall, last week I greatly recommended that we send a very simple message to Hazrat Maulana, inshallah. Send a message. It'll be so beautiful to send a small hadiah. We can small a hadiah as well as say, Maulana, I'm using your kitab in my classes. Please make dua for me. Allahu Akbar. I can't imagine the benefits that we will get, inshallah. So, and maybe those of us who are in Durban can send it on behalf of the class if you can do that. There's only khair in doing that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Jazakum Allah khair. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa ashabihi wa barik wa sallim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعينك يا فتاح. خير. We are continuing from the actual matan. We are continuing from the actual matan of Aqeedah al-Tahawi. And we are now starting with our very first line of Aqeedah al-Tahawi from the teaching perspective. نقول في توحيد الله معتقدين بتوفيق الله. نقول, we say, في توحيد الله, regarding the oneness of Allah, معتقدين, believing, بتوفيق الله, that with Allah's assistance. All right, so now in this particular verse here, or in this particular statement here, there is a lot that we have to unpack. The first thing is naqulu. Who is the na? Who is the naqulu? Who is the we who is speaking? He is obviously referring to the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, more specifically the Maturidiyya, more specifically those who were impacted by the teachings of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahumullah. So when we say when the author says naqulu, he is highlighting the position of Aqeedah that is held by every adherent to this understanding. That is the Maturidi understanding, or those who have been affected by the teachings of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Fi tawheedillah, in the oneness of Almighty Allah. Now, the reason why is because the oneness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is till today a subject. If you look at the entirety of the Christian religion, if you go on social media, you will find that this is something which many people find it necessary to engage in. I myself, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't blessed me with that understanding. I cannot appreciate it. In fact, out of all the subject that I have done, this is the one that I enjoyed the least, simply because of the amount of discussions and counter discussions that I found in it. However, when it comes to the understanding of the oneness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam Tahawi says, I am not giving you my personal opinion. I am giving you the opinion of a bona fide academic circle. That is the circle of the Maturidiyya. And what is dina bi tawfiqillah? That we are absolutely convinced that through the will of Almighty Allah, what we are saying is going to be correct. Meaning, we are not doubtful in what we are saying. We are not going to be hesitant. We are extremely confident in the correct position of what we are about to say. So he says, Inna Allah wahidun la sharika lah. Inna Allah wahidun la sharika lah. That indeed Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, and Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no partner. Now, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the entirety of the Quran, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights that out of every injustice a person can do, a person can do an injustice of sin, a person can do the injustice of murder, a person can do the injustice of theft, a person can do all the various different injustices. However, the greatest injustice would be the injustice a partner to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the very first and the primal aspect of a person's faith, is the belief, rather the i'tiqad, that is the deep-rooted conviction that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolutely alone in everything that he does. There is none that can associate with him, either as an associate or as a partner or as an underling or anything of that. That is why Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Fussilat in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we shall show them our signs in every region of the earth and in themselves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. That is why, I do not know if it was in this class, but I had discussed the position of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. And the position of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is that if there is a person who he's from the time of his birth till the time of his death, he was on a desolate island, meaning none of the teachings, none of the prophets, none of the teachings of Almighty Allah had ever reached him. Will that person be obliged by Almighty Allah to die on Tawheed, or will he be given an extraneous set of circumstances particular to his situation? Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, based on this ayah, we can understand that it is not a condition for a person to bring, for a person to undertake the realization of the oneness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he be given a message from Almighty Allah. Because Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hidden the signs of his oneness and greatness everywhere. Therefore, that person will also be taken to task by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he had not exerted himself in the awareness or in the understanding of one Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while he was marooned on that desolate place, or in that particular area. Now, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a story which we are not going to highlight here because these stories are very prevalent, and that is when people reject the oneness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when people reject the brilliance of design in the existence of everything, all the creatures of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yet in their very lives they would be people who are proponents of systems. So you will find somebody, particularly somebody who is very academic, somebody who is very intelligent, somebody who has achieved some level of utilizing his intellect into systems of the world, and yet this person still associates a partner with Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inundates us in this world with signs of him that are there, and the signs of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent of creation in acknowledging the oneness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're not going to go through those particular aspects there. There is a very beautiful excerpt that is highlighted by Maulana Fahim Sahib, and he says that in the 20th century, the world view was that there was in nature, there is a consistency in nature, and this consistency has been there since infinity. And this has been the view that the Catholic Church themselves, after an initial a few hundreds years of very staunch opposition to this in the Middle Age, they themselves became proponents of it. However, what have we learned through recent discoveries? We have learned that through recent discoveries that no, this world wasn't in existence for forever. There is no infinitum that is associated to this world. Rather, this world has a beginning, and the beginning of this world, the best way in which it can be explained is that this world, the matter that happened in this world, came about from a great burst of energy that emanated from a single point. So Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that I have created this world for you. Now, this the and the aspect that is highlighted is the aspect of the Big Bang. Now, this is one, we are going to steer the discussion into what is the Islamic point of view with regards to scientific theories that Islam doesn't particularly speak about. Now, for example, with regards to the Big Bang, or with regards to the theory of evolution, or with regards to astrology and astronomy, because we know that in Islam these are not aspects that are lauded, neither are they are they stressed upon. They are not even in certain instances, such as astrology, these are downright prohibited in Islam. Yet there is some haqiqah to it. If you look at it from a scientific perspective, with regards to the theory of evolution, there are certain aspects of the theory of evolution which is in total conformity to what Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about. If you look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the development of the fetus, and you look at the different theories of evolution that are put forth, you will find that it's not dissimilar to what is said. So our ulama, particularly my Ustad Mufti Ashraf, who is a teacher in Springs, this is the viewpoint of himself. This is the viewpoint of Mufti Rada. This is the viewpoint of Mufti Taqi Uthmani rahimahumullah. And the viewpoint of these ulama is that, look, at the end of it, al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. All types of knowledge comes from Almighty Allah, and all types of knowledge belongs to Almighty Allah. We, as the servants of Almighty Allah, we are the most deserving of inheriting that knowledge. That is why all knowledge is virtuous to us. There are certain types of knowledge which Allah Ta'ala Himself has maligned, which Allah Ta'ala Himself has spoken bad of, such as magic. In the Quran, there are many instances where Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala highlights that magic does happen. This whole science of magic or trickery or illusion, this is something that happens, right? When it comes to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. So Almighty Allah said that those people, it was through trickery or through illusion that people thought that there were snakes. However, when it came to the malaika in Surah Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with regards to the two malaika who taught people about magic, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah affirms the story, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that yes, it happened, but it wasn't the malaika who disbelieved, it was the people who disbelieved. So Almighty Allah ta'ala sent the malaika to the people to teach them magic as a test. What do we conclude from here? We conclude that every type of knowledge is valid as long as that knowledge does not contradict the direct teachings of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it contradicts the direct teachings of Almighty Allah, without any thought, we will immediately reject it. And our rejection will be because humanity has not yet discovered that rather Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is correct. Such as, the Helios motion of the sun around the earth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in Surah Yasin. However, when we are speaking of aspects such as the Big Bang and the theory of evolution, we will believe that the Big Bang or the evolutionary process that is visible in the creation of the makhluk of Almighty Allah is from Allah Himself. It is not illogical for us to conclude that this is the system that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used. And from our tafsir, we've learned that, we will learn from our tafsir where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the day of Qiyamah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about various definitive moments, stages, waypoints that are going to occur, that there is a great design in the plan of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to theories such as the Big Bang, when it comes to theories such as evolution, when it comes to astrology, that yes, we acknowledge there is aspects of reality associated to that, because all knowledge is from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do we as Muslims then refute astrology? Because we do not refute the occasional correctness that is associated with it. We refute the fact that when people engage in astrology, they then lose focus of the master of astrology, who is Allah. That, many a times people would say that, Mulanas or scholars are against science. No, scholars are not against scientific research. Rather, scholars are against that scientific research which concludes in anything other than the greatness of Almighty Allah. So when the conclusion is in humanity itself, when the conclusion of your research is in the greatness of nature itself, that is where a Muslim has to put their foot down. However, it is not against the Aqeedah of a believer to understand that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to create, then it started off with a big bang. All right. So once again, this is not contrary to Islam. This is not contrary to Islam. All right. Then we are going to go to this. So there are many examples of logic that they bring about. We are not going to discuss all of that there, inshallah, because that is, we can read through it on our own. We are going to continue to the concept of oneness or wahdaniyah. What is the meaning of oneness? Or what is the meaning of wahdaniyah? Wahdaniyah. Okay, khair. There's only okay. Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu fikum. What we can do is we can end of the message, we can end of the class here today, inshallah. So that gives us about 20 minutes for dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, jazakumullah khair, Shireen, for reminding me. Others we would have carried on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all, inshallah. Please remind me, because I've got about 4 Aqeedah classes that are running concurrently, that when we begin, we are going to begin from page 14, inshallah, from the discussions of the wahdaniyah of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullahu khairan. And just as one request, that when you are making your dua, ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you with the understanding of everything that we are learning in class. So make a specific dua for the ilm that you are undergoing. Jazakumullahu khairan, barakallahu fikum. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.